So thank you very much for inviting me to present here. And I'll have the opportunity to present research I've been doing with colleagues from the University of Oxford, one of whom is Sue Dobson, who should have been here, but her daughter is getting married, so she has very serious reasons for being unable to join. But her spirit is here as well in sort of the things that I'm going to present. So the brief was about coaching specific clients, and because much of our research is also around gender and leadership, some of the sort of findings and discussion will be around that. So I'm focusing on women. Let me see. Okay, so I'm going to provide some insights from the gender and leadership literature and some from our research on coaching outcomes. And then I'm going to reflect on how the two there are areas where the one informs the other. And then I'm going to finish off with some recommendations about the future of coaching. So briefly, an overview around the sort of context around gender and leadership. We did know that women tend to have a gendered upbringing, and then gendered career paths, meaning they tend to sort of follow certain career paths that are more the ones that the women are expected to follow. Example of that, how many females are joining, for example, the HR profession. We all know about the glass ceiling, women aspiring to get to the top of the organization, but the context not allowing them to do that. Another problem is the lack of female role models. And for example, there is a survey run by Grant Thornton every year, looking at the percentage of global female CEOs and managing directors. It consistently is a minority. It might go up and down, and in recent years has increased, but it remains a small minority. So I very much like this quote by Ibarra, Carter, and Silva, saying that high potential women are over-mentored and under-sponsored relatively to their male peers. And one other thing that we observe in the gender literature, there's this, besides glass ceiling, there's another glass phenomenon called the glass cliff. And that is when women and minorities actually are more likely to be offered the C-suite roles in companies that are in financially precarious positions and roles that men may turn down. The literature also talks about work-life balance issues and the tensions, and how the tensions can be in some way sort of invigorating and helping women, but in other ways sort of depleting their energy. The literature also talks about women tending to be more invisible. They're less likely to sort of stand up and sort of speak up in a meeting, and also making an effort, having the need to prepare more than perhaps the other person before a meeting, because they have this sense of not feeling good enough or being assessed as not good enough. Therefore, they have to make that extra effort. And then there's this idea of women responding to gender stereotypes or deviating from them. And then when they do, the environment they might get a pushback from their environment. So it's quite an intense context. And I'm going to present to you some key findings from a study my colleagues from the University of Oxford and I conducted on female CEOs. So we ran this large study in collaboration with Heidrick & Struggles, which is a leading international executive search firm. And we interviewed 151 global CEOs. They were leading some of the largest organizations globally. This was a quite large, substantial study. We interviewed them. We tried to get as many female CEOs as possible. We managed to get 12 of them, and that might sound an appallingly small number, but it was actually 1% more. Our sample was 1% more than the sort of percentage of global female CEOs at that time. And then we produced some of the findings around CEOs, not specific to gender, at the World Economic Forum, and produced a report on that. So focusing on one part of that research focused really on female CEOs' leadership journeys. And we identified in our discussions with these female CEOs that they described going through three sort of self-processes, three self-themes as part of the leadership journey, ending up to the C-suite, ending up to the corner office, actually. The first one is the theme of self-acceptance, and this has to do with women realizing sort of early in their career that they really want to become leaders. They really want to pursue leadership positions. They sort of decide to take active ownership of their leadership ambitions, and they realize that there are a lot of trade-offs in that regard, but they are ready to accept that. The self-theme is that of self-development and has to do with how women work with themselves to identify leadership style they feel comfortable with. The literature talks a lot about the sort of androgynous leadership style. Women compare sort of copying male behaviors. We found that actually women might sort of pick or blend aspects from male leadership behaviors in their own style, but they sort of develop what we call the gynandrous leadership style. And they embrace that. And then the final theme is the self-management theme, which has to do with how women manage their careers, but also manage themselves and their demeanor, and try to find a way to translate leadership in a way they feel comfortable, in a way where they can achieve whatever they want. They can lead and inspire people and get people to do things for them. But on the other hand, in a way that they feel they are not sort of becoming aggressive to the extent that the environment is actually responding negatively to them. One thing that's quite important is they all have to go through the self-acceptance sort of process in order to get to the other two themes, and that's quite critical. So it's almost like a first step in the process. So then moving on to our coaching research and research that Sue and I have conducted an extensive systematic review on executive coaching outcomes. We reviewed 110 peer-reviewed articles on the field, articles that have published studies on qualitative studies, surveys, experimental design studies with experimental designs, and some of the people who are here have been authors in those studies. Well, one of the things we asked was, does coaching work according to evidence? And yes, it does. In very few cases, there were some instances where some sort of negative sort of outcomes of coaching were identified, but 99.99% of the times coaching does work. And then we identified three themes around the sort of types of outcomes produced according to the literature. One is around a person's personal development, and it has to do with them overcoming regressive behaviors or experiences, seeing executive coaching as a life-changing experience, finding ways to sort of apply self-control and being able to identify new skills and abilities. And improve themselves, obtain new skills. The second sort of group of outcomes is around behavioral changes in relation to others, and that has to do with coachees becoming more, improving their leadership skills because of the interventions, and improving also the quality of their interactions with others. And the final sort of group of outcomes is around how the coachee performs in their work, getting a higher productivity, and also sort of being a person that is nurturing a work environment that's more positive as a result of a sort of change in these different aspects of their behavior. And sorry, now I have a small technical issue because there's this sort of thing coming in there that I can move. There's a pop-up window, but hopefully I can still go through this. So how do these two, gender and coaching, come together? Well, I've went through the sort of literature on coaching, and there isn't much. There is some, but there isn't much around gender and coaching. And there are sort of four themes around gender and coaching that the literature sort of identifies. One has to do with whether women need to be coached differently. And there's a study, for example, by Skinner, who suggested after interviewing senior female leaders, they found that we do need to take gender into account in the way we coach senior women. And then there's this sort of reflection around social intelligence and whether men and gender, it makes a difference between the two genders. And although women are better at immediately sensing other people's emotions, men have more social confidence. This is a study by Boyages and Goldman. There are no observed differences among the most successful females. And a similar observation was resulted from a study by Hopkins and Billy Moria. So then that is sort of brings the question, so to what extent do we really need to coach women differently or not? Then the second theme is around how coaches tend to choose a coach, and specifically whether they would choose a female coach. And there is a study by Gray and Gokar who suggested that female coaches tend to coaches tend to choose female coaches as because they see them as role models, because they've been successful, whereas male coaches tend to choose female coaches because they feel they're more approachable, they can understand them. However, when they were looking whether there's a sort of bias in gender choice between the two genders in terms of coaches, male coaches sort of choosing female coaches or not, there wasn't any. Then the other sort of theme is whether female and male coaches actually coach differently. And there is a study that looked at work behavior analysis of executive coaches, and there were some differences relating to gender, but they were not all sort of, it wasn't just gender, there were a sort of a set of different parameters that do take sort of have an effect. And finally, there is research looking at the coach and coachee diets and whether gender similarity does play a role. And it seems that gender similarity doesn't have an impact on career satisfaction or organizational commitment as far as the coachee is concerned. However, there seems to be a gender similarity impact with regards to the relationship, with regards to whether the intervention will have an impact on coachees' self-awareness. And it seems that male coachees tend to find that if they are coached by a female coach, their self-awareness is not improved. That's a study by Boser and colleagues. Now, so how can coaching help women? So by the way, can you see the pop-up in my screen, or can you see the full slide? Because I can see half of the screen is covered by a pop-up window.
We can see the whole screen.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So the first theme, going back to the sort of 3 self-themes we identified from our gender studies, self-acceptance. So how can a coach help at that sort of process? A coach can help in female talent empowerment, and it has to do with helping women to feel that they can be a leader. So they can accept the fact that they can be successful and leaders, and they can sort of pursue that ambition. And then the second is around self-development. It's about sort of creating, helping women to create their own footprint. And it has to do with helping women to understand that they can be that sort of leader that they want to be. They have the potential to do that. And then in terms of self-management, I think a coach could help in finding a balance, helping women to find a balance, sort of embrace the sort of leadership, that sort of aspiration they have, and the leadership style and the sort of leader they want to be, and believing that they are that sort of leader. So I'm closing with some recommendations for the future of coaching, and I sort of broke them down around recommendations for research and for practice. And they are not really recommendations, but question marks, because I think there is so much that can be studied and explored in that sort of space. So the role of gender in coaching outcomes, I think, is an interesting area to explore. And as I said, there are some research in that, but it's not extensive. So it would be interesting to explore whether the sort of coachee diets and the role of gender does have a role in how successful the intervention is, and whether male or female coaches are better in some aspects of their coaching. Then also reflecting on female leaders and their coaching needs. What sort of interventions, or what sort of coaching approach one should adopt to help women who are at different stages in their career, or at different sort of stages in their self processes. Then I think we do need to also focus more on the context, and I'm sure it will be this will be discussed by the next speakers. Sometimes we think of female leaders as one group. They are not. There are cultural differences, and therefore coaching needs to be adjusted to these different contexts. We do need to have a more explicit link between the gender and leadership literature and executive coaching, and find ways for the two to sort of produce new research. And then in the post-COVID era, hopefully that will happen at some point soon, we have these new ways of working as a result of the pandemic, and then perhaps reflect of more ways of coaching, or perhaps ways of coaching that were not used as much. I know, for example, that Angela and Ellen are doing research on sort of video conferencing as a way of coaching others. So these sort of ways, which perhaps will be continue to be used in coaching interventions more. So understanding more around that, I think, is quite important. And finally, some recommendations for practice. This is a question that it's been asked in leadership development interventions or programs, leadership development programs, and whether we should. It's helpful to have women-only leadership development interventions, leadership development programs, and then I think the same question can be asked about coaching, in the sense of, should we treat women and minorities as a sort of different category of coaches, where we need to sort of customize our coaching in a certain way or not? And whether it's also okay, actually, to be asking that question, I'm not sure. Then a second recommendation is being alert and mindful in terms of the practice of the contextual and the sort of personal challenges that may be stalling the development of women, and having in mind the sort of free self-themes and the sort of needs that women have during sort of different stages in their career. And finally, coaching as an intervention, and how it can help pull female leadership talent up in their career ladder. And especially sort of as a result of the pandemic, there has been a lot of changes in how people work, and people losing works, or sort of not finding the same opportunities. So I think coaching interventions can really make a difference in that regard. That's it for me. Thank you.